Hello and welcome to an India Today special broadcast that comes to you from the Bharat Mandapam. I'm Gaurav Sawant, and with me the finest team of India Today's reporters, correspondents, editors who've been on ground zero getting you a 360-degree perspective of India's G20 journey and this final moment and the declaration. I want to begin Raj Chingappa, Group Editorial Director, India Today. With me, Paulami Saha, Aishwarya Paliwal. With me here, our Foreign Affairs Editor, Gita Mohan, Abhishek Bhalla, Shweta Singh and Mosmi Singh, the finest team on Indian television. Raj, I want to begin by asking you your first takeaway from the leaders' declaration, summit leaders' declaration. Were you expecting one?
Well, I think it's a big win-win for India and the world. We talked about One Earth. Today it's One Earth. That, I think, is the biggest thing that's happened. There was so much division before this. You had this vexatious issue of the Ukraine war. No one thought the declaration would come this early. It has happened. I think that's the first big win. The second big win is the fact that early this morning you had the African Union being admitted as a member. And I think I don't know whether it's going to be G21 or what, and this is the last G20, but that's certainly bringing close to 100 nations back into the play. So you have the largest and the greatest grouping, and I think India united that. The other things that you could look at is the fact that, we became the champions of the global south. Okay. And if you look at the agenda and the declaration that comes, apart from the fact that we reached an agreement on Ukraine and how to phrase it, you also have this huge South agenda. And when you look at that, you have the Green Pact. Okay. Significant change in climate change.
Let's take this step
and
by step.
one more thing I'd like to just add is, I think India is recognized by the fact of our digital public infrastructure. You and I use Aadhaar, UPI. That is now going to become a reality for the world. We've been recognized for that. That's tremendous inclusion, which is what the theme of this was, apart from the other things we talked about.
So is this Gita, the Vishwa Guru moment for India, or the Vishwa Mitra? India is everyone's friend, and India seeks that friendship and gets it, Gita.
Well, absolutely, Gaurav. It is a huge moment. There are a few big events that have taken place. One is India's proposal of adding African Union to the G20 is a huge moment. Then you have the fact that there was a lot of contention whether if joint communique would be delivered or not. That happened. Of course, if you look at the language, there's a huge difference from the Bali Declaration on the Russia-Ukraine war, which means there's a lot of given by the G7 and the European Union. We'll have to get into to the final details.
It's actually the win for Global South. It's
a win.
It's a win for Bharat.
But the fact that they agreed to even this text certainly is a win for India, if not anybody else, because yes, there are many who would say that there was dilution, but it is a win for India. It certainly is. Another very important aspect that one should be looking at is the fact that the voice of the global south that they're talking about, that India spoke of, reflected in the climate change or climate justice conversations. Okay. Again, the finer details we'll have to look into, but these are very important aspects of the joint communique that have to be factored in, and the next G20 summit, or the G21, like Raj said, summit will have to match this kind of a grandeur when you're looking at representation of a new world order, a new or a changed world order.
So India hands over now the gavel to Brazil, yes. and we'll talk about that. But Shweta, if I were to ask you, Bharat, the Prime Minister of Bharat, when he started in the morning, he started with a bang, and did that set the tone? A lot of work must have gone behind it, and you were tracking that very closely.
I think, Gaurav, when we attended the G20 meeting in Bali, Prime Minister Modi made it amply clear that this is the year of India's presidency, and it does not mean anything symbolic, just plain symbolic. We could sense that India wanted to do something which the entire world would see, remember, and try to follow. And I think that's what we've done in the entire year. Gita and I were there at Bali. Gita and I were there at the various working group meetings. Some of them, not all of them, because there were 60 cities which hosted. So, but in each and every place, you could see that there was something which was, there was a thought behind it. Be it Natu Natu, taking Ramcharan to Srinagar. what better national integration and what better, message to the entire world. So I think India had made up its mind, Prime Minister Modi had made up his mind, and he just wanted something which could just set the tone, not for India, but for the world.
Must we set the tone not for Bharat, but set a tone for the world? And External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar has mentioned this. He mentioned the Modi guarantee to the African Union. That's important. The word Modi guarantee, not just domestically, but internationally comes into play.
Absolutely, Gaurav, I was just coming to that, because in Bali, it was to the Prime Minister of India that, the President of Senegal said that AU is not being considered. And at that point of time, Prime Minister assured that it will be actually a thought process will go behind getting the African Union in. And ever since that, remember that it was the Prime Minister who first wrote to all the members of the G20. So this initiative of India perhaps is in tune with the way that India has been thinking as a global leader. It's not only about the economics of it, but it's also about not only going ahead yourself, but taking others along.
Yes.
And that's where the global South perspective comes into being. That's where the African Union comes into being.
And Abhishek, you scored that India Today exclusive. You spoke to the African Union president, and when he walked in this morning in that hall, he knew that history was being made. And I must tell all our friends here and our viewers, and we'll ask all our friends, how many of them were confident that there would be an outcome document or a declaration, a communique that would be unanimous? I must tell our friends, Abhishek told me there would be one. And tell me, how did you know that?
No, there was a lot of buzz around it, sometimes it's intelligent guesswork. I would like to say it wasn't guesswork now that I've got it right. There was a lot of talk about it, and few of my colleagues also said that why don't you go ahead, since you're sticking your neck out, and go ahead with the story. But we like to play it safe sometimes, just wait for this moment. But you mentioned the African Union and the chairman. When I did that interview yesterday, Gaurav, there was a lot of excitement in the camp. I was at the hotel, and I asked a very pertinent, clear question that do you want to break it to us right now here that you are going to be being offered the AU membership? The chairman said that we are extremely hopeful, and if it happens, it's because of the role India has played. And I think that's a big takeaway when it comes to Global South. Also the fact that 83 paragraphs in that statement, and there is consensus on all of them. 100% consensus. That's what came out of the press conference. I think a big takeaway. And we are all talking about the Russia-Ukraine war. It's found mention several times.
So it's just Ukraine that finds a mention. The word Ukraine.
There's no reprimand for Russia.
And war in Ukraine, not against Ukraine. War in Ukraine. And also not a single footnote in that entire declaration.
In that sense, it helps Russia. And the fact that we are, have actually upheld ourselves in Russia's eyes, because Russia was seen as the pariah state. It was not, Putin had to stay away President Putin had to stay away because he felt that criticism would be enormous. And here you have a document that recognizes there's a war in Ukraine, but doesn't apportion the blame as it did in Bali to Russia alone.
And this is where India's deft diplomacy, Polemy, comes into play. And the point that people say, we were always non-aligned. As far as new Bharat is concerned, we're not non-aligned, we're actually multi-aligned to benefit us and to benefit the world.
Absolutely. The role that India has played in bringing the African Union on board in itself is testament to that, At a time, you of course spoke about the Modi guarantee. That was what the External Affairs Minister spoke about when, of course, the Senegal head of state had approached him last year in Bali and said that, it's a disappointment that Bali did not even consider, giving permanent membership to the African Union in Bali. And that's when the Prime Minister said, and he did approach the Indonesian Prime Minister as well, and and Prime Minister Modi said, "Ye Modi ki guarantee hai that I will ensure that this becomes a priority," and he did that. We took over in December 2022 the presidency of the G20. In January, we hosted Voice of the Global South Summit. Clearly, we were placing a lot of significance on that. And when it comes to the language, Masmi did mention how we mention war in Ukraine, not war against Ukraine. You speak to government sources and they'll tell you that this is significant. Of course, the fact is that it appears like a climb down on part of the G7 and the EU, that, the language has been brought to a point where, everyone agreed. India gave credit to Brazil, South Africa and Indonesia for having, in fact, put together the geopolitical side of this entire joint communique, which is come out a day before even anticipated, and that's in fact the big surprise. I was pretty confident, Gaurav, after Amitabh Khan's statement yesterday, I'll admit.
Yes.
After Amitabh Khan's statement, I was kind of 70% there.
Yes.
But when he said it's almost ready, he sounded very confident. It's almost ready. Negotiations are underway, was what Vinay Quatra said.
Yes.
But Khan said it's almost ready. I was then confident we're getting a New Delhi declaration, but the fact that it was out today, a day before we anticipated, like, our job's done already.
No, but look at this, Aishwarya. This actually shows our nation's confidence, our diplomacy, deft diplomacy, and our leadership, that they're confident they'll be able to deliver. And when you're talking to the most powerful countries in the world that may not agree on anything, but when they were in New Delhi, they agreed on everything, every para, every word. There was a consensus.
Well, Gaurav, one of the things, let me tell you, that I do know for a fact is that hours and hours of back channel talks and hours of hard work has actually gone into it. I know for a fact officials in the finance ministry, finance minister herself has been speaking for the past almost 1 year with most of the people, because they understand that this will have a domino impact on the world economy. See, over the past many years, we have seen how every 6 months, you hear the world economy is about to collapse. Then you see that, it's back from the brink. Then again, 6 months later, we hear the same thing. The world economy is just about to collapse. So they all understand the fact that if they don't get the things right, if they don't put their own houses and the global economy in one go right, then one thing that will definitely happen is that we will see the collapse of the global economy, something that none of the nations at the moment are ready for.
And Shweta, if I may, the Prime Minister used this opportunity to showcase our nation, from our civilizational history to our being an IT giant across the world, had the whole world watching.
Correct, Gaurav, though I want to add that I've doubted Abhishek throughout whenever he said that we will reach a consensus on this, and I'm still doubtful. I was sitting there in the press conference, I was listening to questions to the foreign minister, and Amitabh Khan, then he thanked his entire team, he took names, he specifically pointed out what happened, but I'm yet to understand what happened.
Wow.
Because not sinking in. I wanted this to happen from day one, but I did not think it will happen. I'm happy.
Okay.
But when there was an entire controversy with regard to just one word, war.
Yeah.
The fact that the team from India worked a way around it is in itself something which makes you salute them.
Okay.
And as far as the question that you are asking, definitely we've all spent a lot of time in the digital zone, digital experience zone, and the crafts bazaar, and every place you find a bit of what India is showcasing for the foreign guests.
Okay.
And I even went to the Odisha stall, and I wanted to ask them what was that moment when they suddenly saw that it was the Konark temple, the wheel. The from the chariot of the sun. How did they feel about it? And they said, oh, it's good omen.
It's
Maybe
a good omen. I mean, yeah, good omen for our country. But Gita, was it touch and go? Or were we always supremely confident that yes, we are taking it through?
In the initial phases, Gaurav, it was not easy, because there was a lot of resistance, and it was not just Russia, the Russia-Ukraine war. There was a lot of resistance on climate change, on the language in the climate paragraph. There was resistance and opposition from China on language, on Indian initiatives and proposals, including Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the millets program. program and women's-led development, some of which do find mention, including Vasudev Kutumbakam. But the fact of the matter is that this only slowly and increasingly came to a fruition after you saw that the summit level meetings had begun. So I do believe that while they had negotiated and while the Sherpa said and the Foreign Secretary said that there's some last minute negotiations still left, I think there was a need for leadership intervention.
Okay.
If you hear Prime Minister Narendra Modi in his opening statement when he said that everybody needs to come together, that certainly was a very important statement and maybe did turn things around. Of course, the Sherpas worked very, very closely and for a long time to get the text right and acceptable to everyone. Amitabh Kant told us that they were fighting for every word.
Wow. Wow. But let me take this from this point. When you said the Sherpas brought it thus far and no further, was it then the Prime Minister's personal chemistry, Abhishek, with world leaders? Did that take it through, past the finish line? And with such style that the Prime Minister, when African Union was brought in, the Prime Minister also said trust deficit because of war, Yudh, and it's time to bring in that confidence once again. Was that something that turned even the skeptics around?
In that press conference, Gaurav, one thing which was quite heartening was for Amitabh Kant to name young officials. He named 4 of them and he said that they worked very hard.
Inam and Ashish.
Isn't it? So I think that was a big moment for people who are behind the scenes. And Gita would be able to elaborate on this in a much better way. That there is a lot in diplomacy that happens behind the scenes, and those are perhaps the unsung heroes. Not taking away anything from Prime Minister Narendra Modi's charisma.
Okay.
Of course, as a very popular leader, not just within the country, but he does have a rapport with world leaders as well. I'm sure that magic has worked. But there's a lot of hard work that's gone on to not just make sure that there is a joint statement in the first place, but 100% consensus.
Raj, what's your take on that?
Look, I spoke to Amitabh Kant at midnight, 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. He seemed very confident. And I also spoke to the other interlocutors. And there was, I think, let's look at this. Let's not just look at it this moment. This is a process that began last November. Look at the positioning of this. One Earth, one family, one future. If you see they work to each of these things, if you look at the final document, they divide that and deliver on each of those fronts. The other thing I think we must, and Gita had mentioned this, you are seeing the emergence of a new world order. And what is that world order that we're looking at? We're looking at an order that believes in global good. That is what the Prime Minister said. Why did they all come together? Because at the end of the day, the world is in a terrible position at the moment. We're deeply divided. Climate change is impacting us. There's wars, there's inflation, So this was a moment, maybe a turning point in human affairs, where nations come together and say, okay, there are huge differences, but if we don't start sorting them out now, that's what the Delhi Declaration says. It is a movement forward. It's a great beginning, a good beginning. There's a lot to be done. There's a huge amount of problems. It's not going to go away. But I think the way it was planned and the fact that the Prime Minister had the vision, right, to say, okay, let's position it this way. And as someone said, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, it's become true. We are one family, one world. And that's what I think we're looking at when we look at it. Look at the declarations that have come. Climate change. We're now moving from billions to trillions of dollars in terms of aid or technology to people. Take a look at even what I mentioned earlier, digital public infrastructure. All these are critical to nations. So very early, we knew that the problem of Ukraine is not going to be sorted out. We moved deftly towards the global south, positioned ourselves as the voice of the global south. Overtook China, by the way. China had built so much. They put close to $1 trillion into each of these countries. We have turned that around, and now the focus is on us. And as you saw, President Biden also, when we talked of the Middle Eastern corridor, we're breaking that little nexus that is going on there. And so I think there are a lot of, as I said, win-wins that are emerging.
Aishwarya, and since we have very little time on this part now of our discussion, very quickly, what's the key takeaway from all this effort that's gone on for the past 1 year? What's your key takeaway from India's G20 moment?
I think India has arrived, Gaurav. This has actually, all those people who used to think, no, this is all just gimmick, this is all just faff. India does not have it India has not arrived. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, a lot of it is just faff, all gas. I think this making sure that the 20 most powerful nations in the world are agreeing in the national capital speaks a lot about what India has been doing and what India will do in the coming years.
Polemy?
Well, thank you. I think for me, the big moment came in the morning itself with the joining of the African Union into the G20. It will always, history will always say it was in New Delhi that the G20 became a G21, and I think that's a huge achievement. In the face of all the talk that we're seeing around the Russia-Ukraine war, the mention of it or not, etc., in the Delhi Declaration or climate action and all of that, I think this headline might get lost, but it shouldn't ideally, because this is a big moment when I say that 55 African nations have found place at the high table when there was only one African nation at the high table, that was South Africa.
Okay. Amit, you've joined us on the show. According to you, key takeaway from all the effort that you've also put in the past 1 year, the entire nation, was involved in this. We were reporting this story very extensively, but key takeaway according to you?
True, Gaurav. Yesterday I had met UN Secretary General, and he mentioned one thing, that all the multilateral forums, the multilateral banks, as well as the UNHC is outdated and they do not reflect the realities of the present time.
Yeah.
But where do we begin? I think that first step has been taken in this G20 in New Delhi summit, with AU becoming part of the G20, with so many developmental projects coming this way, biofuel association in place, as well as voicing the voice of the global south. That was the focus of India, and we have been able to not only do it, but do it in a very historical manner this time around.
Mosmi, according to you, key takeaway?
I think the key takeaway is in what Amitabh Kant said, that there were tough, ruthless negotiations that happened, and then ultimately they had to say the leader wants it. So India is the leader, and perhaps India has got the ability to bring the developing countries and the developed nations together on the table, talking table.
So, if Gita, we wanted to be the bridge, we are the bridge now between the global south?
Certainly, we've become the bridge. But when I was speaking to the Argentinian, just one addition over here, Gaurav, the fact that he said that AU has been added, and he's proposed CELAC, which is Caribbean and the Latin Americans, also to be added when the Brazil G21 summit takes place next year. So let's see if that happens. It'll truly represent what the new world order looks like.
So, I mean, that clearly is in sync with India's civilizational thinking. And, this discussion here on India Today will continue. This part of the show, we've run out of time. But isn't this India's civilizational thinking that's actually being seen on ground in India and across the world? Ayam nij paroveti garna laghu chetasam udar charitanam tu vasudhaiv kutumbakam. For joining us on this India Today special, many thanks.